This is Silicon Reel, the half-hour dedicated to the people of the London technology startup scene. My name is Brian Rose. I also host a show called London Reel, which is a similar trialogue format. It's a little bit longer in length. My co-host today and partner in the whole Silicon Reel venture is Mr. Bryce Keane. He is the founder and director of Albion Drive, and he's also a member and co-founder of the Three Beards. And if you haven't heard of the Three Beards, then I pray for you. Because they are a London phenomenon. They host the Silicon Drinkabout, which is a weekly get-together for anyone who is in the tech community, or if you're like in a zoo and you want to go look at them, because you can go. Anyone can go. There's no sign up. There's nothing like that. You also run monthly events called Don't Pitch Me Bro and quarterly Digital Sizzle. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being part of this crazy venture.
Good to be back. Good to be back in the
Yeah, no, it's very good. And our guest today is Mr. John Collison, who is the co-founder of Stripe, a company that makes it easy to start accepting credit cards on the web today. I ripped that straight from your site.
No, it's accurate. I mean, that's why we have it on the website.
Perfect. You are from Limerick, Ireland. You live in Silicon Valley, which, according to Bryce, is not a place but a marketing concept. So you live in a marketing concept. That's what Bryce said on his London Reel show. I think you've attended Harvard a little bit, and he's also a pilot. John, welcome to Silicon Reel.
No, it's good to be here. I think I hit London during its one day of summer, which is a good time to visit.
You brought the weather with you now.
Yeah, I wish I could say it's been like this all year, but it really hasn't. But, you know, as immigrants to this town, we know not to complain about the weather.
Oh, yeah. Well, all three of us.
We're better than that.
I guess
we're all expats.
You know, I must say, this rarely happens, but I already have some beef with John, and this is why. You know, he went to Harvard, and I went to MIT down the street, and we're both pilots. But he is what we call a fixed-wing pilot, which means he flies airplanes, and I fly helicopters. And the two groups hate each other.
They do?
They do. All my instructors are always like, yeah, we don't like those fixed-wing guys. So, explain why we hate each other, John.
So there's this thing where, like, MIT students always talk about how they like have this whole rivalry with Harvard, and they'll like play pranks on the Harvard statue, and then the Harvard students are like, Who?
Yeah.
And it's similar to like the helicopter pilot thing. I'm like, helicopter pilots, I guess. Yeah. No, helicopters are cool. I mean, a little bit dangerous. I go for the safer forms of transportation, but
no, fair enough. My instructor was always, you know, they just start a rivalry right away because, and it never made sense to me. He's like, yeah, we can hover. And I'm like, all right, well, you know, okay.
that was his big moment.
Yeah, he's like, we can hover.
I'm trying to picture like a Top Gun moment, but I don't know what the helicopter pilots would look like. Like it's
really
they just
weird.
Sit there hovering.
Yeah, they're like, check this out.
Lying in wait. Yeah.
Elevated.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't get it, but I'm glad you put those to waste. Actually, the MIT guys don't really think about the Harvard guys.
No, they don't. You're right.
Yeah.
How long have you been flying helicopters?
I started actually in Chicago probably about 10 years ago, and then when I moved to London, I kept it up. But I actually don't have my license yet, but I've got about 60 hours in an R-22, which is a two-man helicopter. It's basically a lawnmower in the sky. It's a piston engine, so you're like, you know. So actually I have this checklist that I go through on London Reel every day, and that's from piloting, because you have to go through like every little thing, because you forget that one thing, you fall out of the sky. I'm sure it's the same with...
Yeah, it's the same in fixed wing, and you're right about the aircraft and that, you know, occasionally I'll take someone up for a spin, and when we go flying, I think they have a very different picture in their head of what it is, and you're in this like 80 horsepower, like, you know, two-seater with an 80 horsepower engine is what I trained in, and like, you know, most cars have double that horsepower. They're like these like totally tiny precarious things.
And it's loud too, right?
Oh, it's loud.
Yeah, people don't know it's that loud.
And it's bumpy.
Yeah, and it's bumpy too. I mean, I was reading your story, and you moved from Limerick to Silicon Valley when you were like 17 or 18. I mean, that's... Yeah, so... It's quite a move.
Basically... Patrick, my co-founder at Stripe, and we started a company before Stripe called Automatic that did tools for eBay sellers, and then that was acquired in 2008, and then went back to Ireland, then started college, and then during college ended up started working on Stripe, because you know yourself, when you start working on something, it's not like one day you decide, oh, I'm going to start a company. The whole gestation process is pretty gradual, and so we'd been talking about these kind of ideas, and like with Stripe specifically, we'd been talking for a while about when we had been doing Automatic, our last startup, like how miserable it was, like the payments part of it, but also how like the banks who you traditionally had to go through to accept payments online just didn't get it. Like, you know, traditionally to like open a merchant account, if you wanted to swipe payments for your, you know, for your brick and mortar store, you would like be there filling out all this paperwork and, you know, sending it off, and a few weeks later you get approved. And then the internet came along, and, you know, banks' response to the internet was to put a PDF version of their application form online. And you're like, guys, that's not what the internet is about. And so Patrick and I very much came at Stripe from the like the angle of engineers and the angle of you know, what if we build a set of APIs for people doing stuff with payments, and we like built that set of APIs, and we got one person using this, and then two, and then very, very gradually building it out. And obviously the tricky thing was that, I mean, we didn't know that much about the financial sector, so we had to learn as we went.
It's a crazy place, the financial sector, because all the banks have been there forever, and I think by nature they're trying to protect it. It's the innovator's dilemma. They don't want to kill their own business model. I used to work in the banking industry. It's a very profitable business model, even when times are hard. So it must be tough.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. It's the innovator's dilemma. Like if you look at an industry like web hosting. You know, previously in web hosting, if you were to do anything, you'd have to like buy managed, you know, servers and like have them in a colo, and you're paying whatever amount per month, and that's like before you serve your first web request. And so there was this like incentive to keep the status quo around, because it meant that like running whatever tiny small traffic website, you know, started at, you know, thousands of dollars a month. And so the hugely disruptive thing about AWS or Heroku or all of these is like they're charging on a, you know, per unit of computing power basis, or, you know, per web request basis, and so like for all the small users, for all the users who aren't getting that much value out of it, they're not paying very much, and so it's not in the traditional web hosting company's interest for this whole model to promulgate. And that is the classic innovator's dilemma, right? It's like, you know, acting against your interests by serving this like lower end of the market. And so I think it was similar in financial services, where like, you know, the banks were interested in the kind of large e-commerce companies, and everyone else they didn't really care about. And you know, there was like high monthly fees. It was like all a relationship business where you had your account manager and everything. And the way the web is going, that is just not how payments online should work. And so we took a lot of our cues from, you know, other instances like, you know, like we talk a lot about cloud hosting, because I think it's a good case where you have a very, you know, old school way of doing business, just like completely replaced by a technology platform.
When did you first hear about these guys, and what's your read on them? Because you see all sorts of different companies every day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I met John last time he was in London. So Stripe have just set up a European operation for the first time, which is really interesting. So they're obviously branching out here, and John was in town visiting a local team, and got in touch with us and came down to a drink about, and very kindly stood there for a good 4 or 5 hours answering just about everyone's questions, because he's quite well known in the tech scene. Particularly,
why is that?
Because I don't think you have many. So the one element of that's, I think, with John's story that you breezed over is that when he was 17, Octomatic was obviously got into Y Combinator, which is the most prestigious accelerator in the world. It's given rise to all sorts. Reddit came from Y Combinator, Songkick, I think Airbnb, Dropbox.
These kind of folks, yeah.
This is like this place is sort of just off the charts as far as
are these PayPal founders, or is that a different?
No,
Paul
so
Graham
Paul Graham and a few others started Y Combinator. They had had a very successful web business early on, and they I think they got a lot of what was important about web businesses, and they really shaped the ecosystem. And then separately, we ended up raising money from some of the PayPal co-founders. But yeah, YC was one of our first investors.
So after they bought Octomatica, is that right?
So it merged, didn't it, with another company? Or?
Yeah, we merged with these two British founders, Harjeet and Kulveer Tagar, and it was bought by a Canadian company actually by the name of Levchin a year later. But
that makes me think of something. I mean, the whole reason we're doing this show is because it's about people and relationships. And I'm curious for you. You know, they see a young guy who obviously isn't afraid of coding and jumping into doing stuff. They merged or bought your old company. I mean, do you keep these relationships up with these people, and how much of that is due to your success? It's like your next venture.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think You do, but I think that's just like natural. That's normal. Everyone does, right? And so Harj and I are still pretty good friends and cool as well. Harj is now actually a partner at Y Combinator, so it's like all full circle. We were a Y Combinator company, and Harj is now a partner there.
Wow.
And so it's pretty cool how these things work out. But yeah, it's quite interesting seeing. I just actually met up with. I randomly bumped into a guy in White Bear Yard, which is where our office is based here on Clerkenwell. I ran into someone who had helped us out in 2007 with some Octomatic stuff, and it's funny how these things persist.
Now you're back in London. You used to live in Limerick. Now you live in Silicon Valley. Is any part of you feel like just canceling that plane flight home and staying here in London?
Well, it's funny. I don't think I would live in Ireland anytime soon, just because like San Francisco or the Bay Area and the US is so big and there's so much to explore, and I haven't gotten a chance to live in New York yet or anything like that, but there's so much there, and so I don't have any imminent plans to return to Ireland, but London I'm really liking, and I realize that's like the thing everyone says when they visit a place, but I mean I actually do really like it. I feel like a lot of the specifically I really like the culture and the openness of people here, and just like getting to know people, and Bryce and I mean we have only met each other once or twice, and yet we're like here doing this and next things, and like it's much easier to get to know people here. And you also have like London has this like amazing feel about it, just even the architecture and the infrastructure, and in San Francisco you take the BART, which is this like dirty old from the 50s like screaming train that's super loud underground and it's miserable. I don't know if you've ever taken it, but
a long time ago.
And here you have the like gorgeously clean underground trains and like the Barclays bikes. I've been like cycling around the city all week, and so I think London is like super livable.
I would have never thought someone from San Francisco area would have said A, the tubes are clean, or B, that you enjoy cycling in this city. So
we're having our moment. I'm telling you,
this is awesome.
I was cycling yesterday down Oxford Street, and it was like a game of Frogger in that like
the buses and
you have the buses like passing each other, and
I think cars aren't allowed on Oxford Street. It's dangerous.
It's crazy.
It's all duck and weave.
I want to just ask you a bit about Stripe, and I want to just ask you very generally, like, what's been your biggest surprise and your biggest disappointment over the past, what's it been, 3 years, 2 years?
3 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah. Biggest surprise. I get. The biggest disappointment. I mean, I think the if you were to graph kind of happiness or success or of a startup over time, it's like very spiky and very noisy, and like you have up days and down days, and you need to be able to even it out, or otherwise you'll end up being like miserable on 50% of days. It's kind of like this is Nassim Taleb's thing in Fooled by Randomness, that we're oversensitive to the noise, and there's like a lot of noise in startups where you'll have like lots and lots of minute disappointments. Like we haven't had anything major go wrong at Stripe. We've never had some like huge lawsuit, touch wood, or anything go catastrophically wrong with the product. There's been lots of kind of minor things that we've been disappointed with, but I think the whole point of a startup is that you need to be like good at taking that into your stride. And one thing that's been really cool to see as the company has grown is, when you start out, you're these like, you're 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people working on this idea, and it's not even clear if this like idea is a good idea, and it's not even clear if anyone will use it, and it's very much you in this like uncertain limbo of is this like a startup, or is this like four guys wasting their time, and as the number of people working on it grows, you get this very cool sense of like shared mission and shared common purpose, and that's one of the nice things, because that helps even out the those bumps, because even if you're having a down day and things aren't going well in your area, someone else is doing stuff. And so we actually do a lot of Stripe to try and to promulgate this. The fact that we're like, now 55 people all working on this one shared thing. And so, for example, when you ship something at Stripe, like a feature or a product or a new thing, you'll like send out an email to everyone. So we have this like shipped@stripe.com mailing list. And that's just like one of those little things where like you're part of a larger collective thing, rather than like you miserably kind of hammering away on your own part of it. which I realize is not answering your original question.
So the whole company gets that email that we're all launching this thing?
Yeah. It doesn't even have to be like a public-facing feature. You know, like our lawyer will send shipped emails that we have like signed some agreement, or our, you know, like sales folks, or like our support team that they, you know, have got down to inbox 0 on tickets, or this kind of stuff.
Inbox 0.
Cool.
I mean, it's important.
I like that.
It's just extra communication, ultra communication.
Oh yeah, so we do. I mean, I could go on for like a whole podcast about communication, because, you know, we have a lot of stuff around it. But in general, what we try to do at Stripe is like just like surface as much communication as possible and be as much of a hive mind as possible. And so we like have this whole intricate email list structure where you can share information across groups, and you can be subscribed to. It's like a subscription model. Where you can be like pulling in from all these different areas, rather than you don't have to be like listening to one channel. So it's not like, you know, you're on the sys team, or you're on the, you know, product team, or you're on the sales team, or you're on the support team. What happens is like a lot of stuff is organized via mailing lists, and then you can like choose, I'm going to like be part of these discussions and these discussions. And so like, even though I don't work on like systems infrastructure day to day, I'll still keep up with the discussions. It means that like everyone can be part of like a lot of the larger, you know, things that are going on, rather than being very segmented into their one area, which we think is cool.
I think that's good. It's good strategy.
I mean, I guess that's, I mean, and that's probably like your open layout. You were saying you don't have a receptionist, and is it just like free flow of ideas?
I mean, it's. I feel like I know I really like Mad Men, and
me too.
I
worry about myself because I like it so much.
One of the reasons I really like Mad Men is like Don Draper has this amazing ability to make like completely meaningless things sound really interesting, and like, you know, attach a narrative to nothing at all. And so he'll be talking about, you know, like in the most recent one, Hershey's, and like what Hershey's means, and Hershey's is happiness. And I feel like sometimes people pitching, you know, ideas on collaboration can be a little like that. And you're talking about like free flow of ideas, and, you know, like 99% of a startup is not about like free flow of ideas. It's like having a clear idea of what you're doing and like executing on that, and being able to like really get stuff done and get stuff done at a faster pace than everyone else. And so it's a little bit of the, you know, everyone sitting around talking about their like free flow of ideas. But at the same time, we do think that one, like, sharing information is just like really important, because one thing we try to do at Stripe is like we don't have like all these very different layers of management. Like everyone is working on their own individual thing, and so people, no matter kind of how long they've been there or what they're working on, it's like an individual working on tasks rather than managing a team. And so, for example, we don't have product managers at Stripe, which is a fairly traditional role within tech companies, where that person is responsible for just like speccing the product and managing it, but not actually implementing it. Instead, there'll be like a, you know, 2 or 3, 4 person engineering team, or like, you know, 2 engineers and a designer working on something, and they will and like one of the engineers will just do the product management part-time, so they'll be responsible for making sure everything that is getting done that needs to be done for it to be shipped. They're the ones responsible for like talking to the users along the way and making sure that this actually like solves the person's problem. So, you know, people have you know, a huge amount of autonomy in how they do things. If people are going to have all that autonomy, one of the things you need is like they need to very clearly understand what's going on at the company, and like, you know, what our plans are for the next, you know, N months, and also what everyone else is working on. So if I'm dependent on, you know, if I'm working on this product, and we're also going to need to get the, like, you know, get some deal done and like sign some contract, I need to know like how up to speed the legal team is with this and all this kind of stuff. And so the whole point of the mailing list structures and like the general free flow of information across the company is that people can work much better autonomously if they like can keep as much of the state of the company in their head as possible, rather than all these independent departments who don't really know what the other one is doing. And so, you know, we also have like fairly regular all hands meetings where, you know, there's actually a lot of detail on what each team is doing, even if it mightn't be like directly relevant to what you're doing today. It's pretty important to know the general direction.
Okay. I'm going to hit you with a devil's advocate question, and then you need to come up with one too. And I'm just looking at the business model for the first time, and I'm like, okay, I look at your company. You're a new company. I look at your fees. It's like 2.9% of transaction. You're very upfront about that. 30 cents a transaction, and I say that's the same as MasterCard. That's the same as PayPal. You're a new company. How do I know if you will go insolvent? I'll get my money. I'm sure you hear all these questions all the time. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you the standard answer is that, you know, if we're
Or give me your answer.
Well, you know, if we're having you know, a newspaper interview, I'll say that, like, one, as the business, the money is always held in your name, and so when you charge a credit card, it's like your money, it's not Stripe's money, and so, you know, even if Stripe went insolvent, you would just like get all that money, which is like a pretty nice property to have. But I think the general question you're asking is about, like, why do people use Stripe if it's like priced the same as, you know, other things, and I think the reason is Stripe really lets people build things that they either like that they wouldn't otherwise build, and so we see all these like cool use cases that you probably know Squarespace, the like online site.
One of our sponsors for London Real.
So Squarespace, Squarespace use Stripe for a bunch of stuff, and they use it for like managing their subscription payments. And so, you know, when you sign up for Squarespace first, you enter your credit card number and you get a free trial, and then you're like billed every month after that. And they also use it so that Squarespace sites can really easily start accepting payments. So imagine you're like a photographer and you set up your Squarespace site. You're there, you know, adding your photos to it, and you're like, oh, I want to actually sell prints online. You can use Squarespace's commerce features, and you can just click, boop, link my Stripe account, and you're accepting like you're selling prints online 2 minutes later. And before this, Squarespace, if they'd wanted to let people do that, if they'd want to add commerce features, they would have had to like have people go get a merchant account and like fill out all that paperwork and maybe hear back like many weeks later. And the point is, like, you know, no one would really do that. Everyone would fall out of the conversion funnel. Like, Squarespace is just like, it doesn't make as much sense to build this product to let your users accept payments if you know, something like Stripe isn't around. And so I think, like, it's not so much, you know, you know, why would I use you versus this versus this? It's like the fact that you have this set of APIs that's really powerful, that you can do things that like other you can't necessarily do with PayPal or like a merchant account. I think that's why people use it.
So you're ultimately not a finance company, you're a technology company.
Yes. Oh, and we say that all the time. We like say that till we're blue in the face. And I think the interesting thing is, like, you know, we're a technology company, and yes, there is a financial part of that, but that's a little bit like saying, I don't even have a good analogy for it, but you know, like Transport for London is like a transportation company. They're not, you know, they're not in the business of producing wheels or trains. They're like about getting people around, and so that's why they get into all their other things. And similarly, like moving money around is like part of what we do, but the core of what we do is like providing better technology so people can build better apps, build better websites, and we're seeing like all sorts of cool stuff being built with Stripe right now. So do you know Lyft and Sidecar, the ride-sharing services?
Sidecar.
Yeah, so the ride-sharing services, they're in a lot of places in the US. So like Lyft uses Stripe, and what they use it for is it's super cool. It's this app. You take it out of your pocket, you sign up, and you like give them a credit card or something like that. Then when you're anywhere in the city, if you're anywhere in San Francisco, you like tap a button, and like a car comes to pick you up, and they drop you off where you want to go, and the fare is just deducted from your, you know, from your card on file. The interesting part about it is, like, these aren't cabs. These are just like normal people driving their cars. And so like normal people can also sign up for this service. You can like become a driver if you want to earn income on the sides. And so the people driving for them are a lot of like students, a lot of people working part-time, all this kind of stuff. And so you can imagine if you're Lyft, the real challenge here is like, not only do you need to like charge money, but you also need to like, you're not the one collecting it. You're not collecting it purely on behalf of yourself. You're like paying out all these drivers. And so Lyft used Stripe to say that, okay, we're going to store all these like customer payment credentials, and then we're going to, like, when we charge $20, say, okay, you know, whatever, I don't know what the ratios are, but like 17 of it goes here to the driver, and we keep 3 of it for ourselves, or something like that.
Okay.
And so they're doing this like kind of complex, multifaceted thing that, like, I don't even know if you can do that with PayPal or a merchant account.
It's interesting because, yeah, we look at it originally as a consumer, but then when you're a vendor, all of a sudden.
I was just going to say, Brian, if you start taking donations, you're going to be using Stripe. I know, you're on
weird because
Squarespace.
he's like, Squarespace, now you can sell your photos, and everyone's like, what?
Yeah.
And now you're the best thing.
But you're totally right on the technology company part. You know, the interesting, like, the amazing thing about the internet is that like it's breaking down. You just break down all these geographic barriers. Like, you know, we were talking about UFC earlier. If you go on a UFC forum, it'll be, you know, guys from the US and Australia and South Africa and the UK, just like all talking together, and like no regard paid to the geographic boundaries. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with Stripe, but for the internet economy. And that right now the internet economy is like quite like fractured. Like you have the US money flows around within the US, and South African money flows around within South Africa. And what we're trying to do is make it easy for like anyone, anywhere to just like start participating in the broader web economy and make that like more interlinked and more global. And I know that sounds kind of like very high level, but that's actually a really meaningful thing. And so that's why we're in London. That's why there's like 4 of us based here now, is that London's probably going to be the hub for as we start expanding into Europe, and again making it so that like if I'm just like a developer in Denmark building a service that people really like, that I can start using it. And we see this all the time where people, it's like people all over the world that form the web community and that form the web we use today. Like Travis CI is like a pretty popular continuous integration tool. There are like some guys based in Germany. If you send out like mailings to your users, you probably use Campaign Monitor, which is based out of Melbourne or Sydney?
Sydney, I think.
Yeah. And so we want to kind of like have there be more of this, have the web be more global.
Well, I mean, London's always been the currency capital of the world. You could say New York is for stock markets, but for currency, it's always London. It's right between Tokyo and New York, and it's a smart place to be. It must be tricky, though, when you're dealing with all these random countries and offshore dollar accounts and all that stuff. I'm guessing it is. But anyway, I wanted to ask Bryce. I'm putting you on the spot.
Yep.
If you had to ask him a devil's advocate question, what would it be?
I don't know. I've more of a devil's advocate question. I've got a different question.
Yeah.
It's not so much devil's advocate. So I want to know about. So the one thing that you may have glossed over is that
second thing I've glossed over.
Second thing you've glossed
over. You're just glossing over everything.
All the glossing. We're having all the glossing.
You guys drop all these big names and these big like why company why and I mean like a lot of people don't know these things, but in your niches everyone knows these things.
Well, so one of the things I want to explore, one of the things about John Collison that I find quite fascinating, aside from the fact that he's a dude who comes to drink about and will spend 5 hours talking to people he doesn't know.
That's pretty cool.
Which is very nice about it, which thank you for that. Is that John's co-founder, Patrick, is in fact his brother, if I'm not mistaken. Mystery, intrigue. So in fact...
He was my brother before he was my co-founder.
Well, see, timelines.
Just discovered.
We mucked up the timelines of my documents are out of order. But the reason I find this interesting is, I want to get to like, what was it like growing up in the Collison household? When did you guys learn to code? Because we're talking about Y Combinator at 17 years old with a product that was then acquired. So the two of you together, there's what, 1 year between you or 2 years between you?
2.
2. One of the things we face most often, and the reason I bring this up, and I was quite curious about your sort of childhood and growing up, is always one of the things that we hear a lot is the shortage of developers, developing talent. Now the two of you together, it's rare enough to find one person in a family who's a wonderful coder. Having two that are brothers and also co-founders is I find really interesting, not only because it's a local European thing, but of course the age you started and the business and then off. And
yeah, I mean, I think the thing about, so Patrick learned to code when he was, I think, 9, or started coding when he was 9. I think learn to code has this like, air of completeness and finality about it. That it's like completely inaccurate. I learned to code and then I was done with learning to code and I knew all the code and it was great at 9. And 10 I moved on to philosophy. But so he started coding when he was 9. I was a bit later. I was 14, and it was like both of us in the early days messing around with websites. Actually, we just we both learned to code from this book, the PHP Visual Quick Start Guide by Larry Ellman, and Larry actually just joined Stripe last week.
Whoa!
This week, which is pretty cool.
Okay, that's full circle. That's
totally full circle.
Yeah.
And like we have this like highlighted, marked up copy from like 15 years ago.
Did you ask him to sign it when he came in?
Yeah, well, we met him for the first time about half a year ago, and I'm not sure if he signed it, but we got a photo, which was good. But anyway, we learned to code then, and I think the thing that's valuable is. It's not like some people learn to code at a young age and they take it to it like ducks to water and they end up having like amazing engineering contributions their whole life, and that's awesome. But specifically within the startup community, and I think the general debate around you read in the papers all the time like should everyone be learning to code and this kind of thing. I think there is a value to like just like everyone should learn to write, but not necessarily become a writer. And I think there is same like everyone learns maths in school, even though a lot of it you don't use calculus in most of your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And I think there is also an element of this in engineering where forming a building block for the things you do in the future and understanding the technologies change and the frameworks change, but understanding the general principles and ideas, I think sets you up much better. Because, the thing about the math you learn is that you're not learning the specifics of how to do, I don't know, did you do trading or whatever when you were in finance, or you're not, if you become an accountant, you're not learning accounting, but it gives you all the building blocks for that. And I think learning some kind of building blocks such that later down the road, if you end up doing stuff, really helps you. And the second thing that I think is valuable about knowing how to code is for startups, it gives you this self-reliance. If you want to start, an online publication, you probably start off by writing the pieces yourself. And even if you're not the best writer, you kind of get the idea and you hire one or two writers, and then it really gets under its own steam. And with Stripe, it's kind of the same thing, where Patrick and I don't write much code day to day anymore, but you get that first version of the product that people start using, and it's hard to bootstrap that, right? And I know people who've done it, and it's really impressive when people build a technical product or any kind of product without knowing to code themselves. There's one founder I know who I really respect, and she has built a number of companies at this stage. She doesn't know how to code, and so she was working with a team in the Ukraine who was a development consultancy, and so she would send over specs and stuff, and they would make it, and they would go through this feedback cycle, and it's a really impressive. It's a really impressive feat, but again, it's like dictating a novel because you don't know how to write, and then when you have to go back and edit it. You have to read that back to me, and then it's this it's so much clunkier. And so I think if you're going to be starting a business online or starting a startup, being able to code and being able to dive in and poke at the things yourself is the most important thing, maybe in the very, very early stages. Then when something's later, it becomes more of a company, and there's so many other factors at play. But if you're just starting a startup day one, it's super valuable to be able to at some level, there will be code involved, and so you're either writing the code, or you're having someone else write the code, and that gets compiled to code. But it means you can speak at the appropriate layer.
Or you're hostage to someone writing the code, right?
Or you're spending your days searching for a technical co-founder,
right?
As we see a lot of.
But you pretty much said the same thing when we had your show.
Yeah.
And then you surprised me at the end. You said, "What's the one thing?" And you were let's learn how to code early.
Well, what do you think of...
And I guess my point is that you don't actually have to become the world's best engineer. I don't actually know that much. I've never done any formal CS, and I'm not that great an engineer. But I think having some minimum level is the really important thing. And so I guess that was my point in the comparison to the education. I don't think everyone should study CS as people study CS in college today. I think it's kind of useful to have.
Right. My next question was going to be who's better, you or Patrick? But is it competitive? Patrick.
At engineering.
At engineering.
At everything else.
Everything else is you, and he does the engineering. Okay, got it. Now I know how it fits together.
I'm moving us along. I'm just going to ask you another couple random questions, and we're going to wrap this up. If you sold Stripe right now for some ungodly amount of money, and you had to sign a non-compete, you can't compete in the industry, and you got to take 6 months off, and then we're going to give you 20 million pounds to go do something else, what would you do?
Interesting.
Could you take 6 months off? That's a question. Some people can't take vacations.
No, I can take vacations.
Okay.
Go fly. But no, there's a. I think there's so many things that I want to say that sound like cliches because they're the hot topics. But for example, I think drones are legitimately pretty interesting. I know. A handful of people now who are running drone startups, and the really interesting things about drones is there are so many things that the drones are bringing the internet into the real world, in that it's kind of crazy that, trivial example, if you're a cattle farmer, you can't just be where are my cattle? And that's something that is impossible to answer, and that's one of the places that the internet has not pervaded. And so one of the companies I know that's doing drone stuff is doing a lot of it is agriculture, where it's surveying and things like that, or they're doing it in industry for mining or anti-poaching or all this kind of stuff. And so it's there's so much data online, and you can do so much stuff. Google can crawl the web, but you can't crawl the real world, and that was previously extremely inefficient. Anti-poaching, the way it worked was two guys in a Cessna flying around the country, and they would maybe spot a poacher occasionally, but there was so much that went uncaught. And so the idea behind drones is you're gathering more and more data, and you can have these kind of very cheap devices out there in the world, like connected to the internet, recording or doing something like that. And so I think that's a good example of just like a really interesting trend that is happening before us. I mean, there's also the scary surveillance aspect of drones.
Yeah, just that word makes everyone
So I was going to say, for the ones who are, because we get a lot of listeners at London Real who are international, who are not necessarily tech. So anyone who tunes into this, just want to clarify, we're not talking about military drones.
Yeah, what could be?
Anyway,
Yeah.
We're talking about the small kind of quadcopter.
So the a drone is, I mean, the colloquial word for an unmanned aircraft, and so you have the military unmanned aircraft which shoot you from the sky, and then you have the like any other kind of like unmanned robotic aircraft, and they're getting pretty small these days. You have drones the size of like a dinner plate, and a pretty common one is a multi-rotor, like a quadricopter, where you have like these 4 separate ones.
I got one of those,
and they're pretty cool aircraft.
We had a guy drink about with one last week, actually.
Oh, really?
2 weeks ago, he was at the front flying it around. Yeah.
And I think the thing about drones that will have to evolve is that in the US there are like very clear kind of expectations around what's private and what's not in the real world. Like there's all this precedent in case law that like a police officer can't enter your house without a warrant. But like that took time for people to develop the concept of like where are the boundaries and like what's and then cars came along, and now a police officer can like look inside the windows of your vehicle, but they can't like get you to open the trunk without a warrant because that's like a private space. But like the back seat of your car isn't a private space, and we've developed all these kind of understandings of like what the expectations are as these new things develop. And I think in the online world, I mean, as we've seen with all the NSA stuff, we still haven't like there's like whatever you think, there's a clear mismatch of expectations here, where like people expect the government to not be collecting all data that goes over the wire, and I mean, yeah, and I think similarly with drones, there's like the very scary aspect of like, okay, now there's like so much more surveillance happening. I think that's like fundamentally not a bad thing. It's just like we need better expectations.
Okay.
But anyway, so I think drones are interesting. I could see myself doing something there, but I mean, I also just like really like planes and things, so that may just be a puerile fascination with like things that go flying.
A flying head. Just a couple more questions. This has been breezing by. What's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten?
I mean, there's lots of good advice. Lots of it tends to be very context specific. In terms of general advice, the Y Combinator's motto is make something people want, and I think that's a reasonably good way to look at it, in that the valuable bits of that advice is they kind of leave out everything about kind of market sizing and revenue models and whatever until later. Because generally that can be figured out if you're delivering value to people. Presumably there'll be some way to collect value in return, and so I think that's why if you're deciding if you're the YouTube guys in the really early days, you're deciding should I do this, and you're like, oh well, online video is expensive, and maybe like will people pay a subscription or whatever, and they ended up just like pushing that way off into the distance, and they're like, people really want to be able to share videos online, and we're like making something people want, and that worked out really well for them, and so I think that's a reasonably good kind of motto for startups. And similarly, you often find, you occasionally run into people working on startups, working on these like complete Rube Goldberg machines, and they're like, oh, it's a service, and like sometimes like you don't want to be impolite, but you like legitimately got to ask, like, do people want this? And so
do people want this?
And so I think if you're to have one like completely general piece of advice, I think that's a decent one. There's been lots of Stripe specific advice, but I'm not sure how relevant that would be.
That's a good one.
I like that. Do people want this?
Yeah, well, is it make something people want?
That's the motto.
Wow.
We gotta get Y Combinator on here one day. Talk to those guys.
What's next for you? I mean, what's this year looking like? 6 months, 12 months? Or like, what are the big hurdles or the things you're looking most forward to?
Right. So I think we believe a lot in the core idea of Stripe. As we've talked about it, of anyone anywhere being able to start accepting payments for what they're creating online. And so unfortunately that's good in that it's a very broad statement. It's clearly a large market, and I think it's clearly a thing worthwhile working on. The bad thing about it is like it's a very broad statement, and so there's just like a lot to do. And so we have 2 countries launched publicly. We have 2 more countries in private beta. We'll be releasing a lot more countries over the next year, and we also have like the set of things you can do with Stripe is so broad that we also have a lot of kind of development of the platform. So like I said, recently we started doing really, really cool things for marketplaces where, as I was describing, you can charge money and then split it out to various people on the back end, because so often the fast-growing web companies aren't necessarily charging money for themselves, and they're not like completely vertically integrated. They're like connecting a buyer and a seller in a disparate location, and they're like just running the network. And you see this trend like again and again and again. There's a really cool startup I just tried out in San Francisco called Getaround, which is like, you probably know Zipcar, the like car rental service. Yeah. And Zipcar like own all the cars and they manage the whole fleet and everything. Getaround is like Zipcar but with normal people's cars. And so again, it's like using the liquidity and scale of the internet to provide the service presumably more efficiently and cheaper. And it's cool because they have like a greater variety of cars, and they, I think we'll soon have like a greater density of cars in Zipcar because they're tapping into just regular folks, and presumably as well it'll be cheaper than Zipcar over time. But so I think many of the fast-growing companies are marketplaces, and so we built some features to make their lives easier. But the set of things you can do with like with a paid product is so variable. You can like be having some subscription service, or like people paying you on a one-off basis, or you're like an e-commerce store where you're actually shipping physical goods, or you're a marketplace, and there's all these different things. And so a lot of Stripe will be actually just like making life easier for these businesses. And then again, because we're like the backbone of those businesses, there's so much we can do for them to make their life easier. So right now, if you're a business like doing accounting and tax is completely miserable. And then I know this sounds kind of boring, but like being able to just like sync your like data from Stripe with whatever's doing your taxes, like that's a really cool feature, and that actually like saves business large amounts of money. And so there's a lot. There's this trend underway where we're going from a world where you have like all your payment data. Again, it's like banks, gateways, all these companies that don't get the internet. Like banks, if you use them for online payments, still send you a paper statement in the mail at the end of every month. That's like how they do it. And so you're wondering, how much. You're wondering like, how much of my money is coming from overseas users? And you're there like paging through all the stuff. And so being able to like moving all this stuff online, turning it into, we're a technology company, not a finance company. And so taking advantage of all the technology and all the structured data we have is, I think, a lot of what we'll be doing over the next year.
I was going to turn it over to you for a final question, but I just thought when I'm saying all this, I was like, I got to get your take on Bitcoin. It probably is a whole show, but
it's that's another. Like we have come up with ideas for so many whole shows here. But Bitcoin, the thing that I found really cool about so one, Bitcoin is like genuinely like a technological breakthrough, and the idea that like the fully decentralized nature of it is actually kind of a phenomenal accomplishment, in that before Bitcoin, when everyone talks about virtual currencies, really, like these virtual currencies were just like balanced with some online, you have like Facebook balance, or you have, e-gold balance, or you have, all these services, you have paid them money and they give you a gift voucher. And so there was nothing like that special or interesting about it. Like the thing that's phenomenal about Bitcoin is that you hold these Bitcoins, and like, so long as like there are people in the world who trade Bitcoins, you can trade them with them, and no one can stop you trading with them. e-gold can go out of business, or Facebook can go out of business, whereas in Bitcoin, it's not that anyone's going to go out of business. You have these, and you can trade them with people, and there are no intermediaries. And so that is legitimately a very major breakthrough. At the same time, Bitcoin is still pretty early in its history, and so I think there's a lot of questions around, if it ends up being so highly regulated that it's just not that useful, it's no better than credit cards, then I think that might stopper its growth a bit. But the thing that's really interesting for me actually about Bitcoin is the access component, where anyone, anywhere can get Bitcoins. And so if you're a site accepting Bitcoins on the web today, you can accept payments from someone in India or in like Germany, even if they don't have a credit card, so long as they have some way of getting Bitcoins. And so Bitcoin starts acting as this like universal connector, where like I get Bitcoins by some means. Maybe I pay my friend cash because he has Bitcoins, or maybe there's like a service in my country, like a financial service that turns takes my local payment method, takes M-Pesa in Kenya, and gives them bitcoins in return, and then I pay the service with bitcoins, and then they in the back end convert it to dollars for their earnings. And so I don't think you'll see the word Bitcoin. If Bitcoin succeeds, I don't think you'll see the word Bitcoin around a lot. It'll just like silently be there, like providing value. Like, when you buy, anything, when you buy an iPhone, like foreign exchange was involved there because like, there was a Chinese company manufacturing it, and like money had to be converted into other currencies along the supply chain, but you don't think like, a new iPhone, foreign exchange. And so similarly, when you're doing an online payment, even if Bitcoin sits underneath it, I don't think you'll be like thinking about Bitcoin, or I don't think the word Bitcoin will even play there. You might just have it, what if, you were paying for something and like it was silently being converted to Bitcoin and then like converted back on the other end. I think that's in the success case of Bitcoin is like a world where no one really talks about Bitcoin.
Wow, really interesting. What did I miss, Bryce?
I got two final questions.
Okay, go for it.
Number one, who's your favorite startup right now? One fintech and one non-fintech, just for fun. So
is that one question or two questions?
That's one.
That's one. Okay.
Okay. So I already talked about this. I'll do the non-fintech first. I already talked a little bit about this, but I think the whole marketplace world or ecosystem is not a fad, in that you look at Airbnb, like they're just doing a really interesting thing where before it was, before if you have, in Ireland somewhere, if you have some spare space, you don't have the like advertising power you don't have enough eyeballs to make it worth your while to actually rent that out. Whereas now with Airbnb, you have this platform with all these people who like want to rent space in like, whatever town in Ireland. And that's a really powerful shift. You basically have the like internet allowing these like large communities to interact that previously were just like very, very fragmented and heterogeneous. And so, like I said, Get Around is I don't own a car in San Francisco, and I like rent a car, maybe 2 times a month using like Zipcar or Get Around. And so like the internet is allowing me to like use a car even though I don't own one. And similarly with Airbnb for space, and similarly with, Lyft and Sidecar for short-term ride sharing. And, it gets into all these kind of interesting things. There's a startup called Exec in San Francisco, which is like a cloud labor service. And so if you need someone to do something for you, and like a lot of companies use them for like temp services, you can just like say like I need a person, and like a person shows up, and you didn't have to go through all the like interviewing process and everything like that. So I think marketplaces are a real thing, and they're here to stay, and the internet like changes that. Something like Lyft or Sidecar or Halo here in London, that wasn't really possible 5 or 10 years ago because people didn't have good smartphones that were connected to the internet. And so as we have like better interfaces to the internet that are always with us, which is only in the last 5 years, I think that just enables a new set of things. Favorite fintech company? Here in London, TransferWise seem to be doing really good stuff. I haven't actually used it myself to convert money, but apparently they are just like breaking the banks. It's another case of banks had been eking out all this easy money on foreign exchange, and TransferWise again just saying like, no, actually it's going to work this way, and I think that's a really troubling trend for banks, which is like they're being unbundled by all these different companies. You have if I want to actually sell things in my like cafe or at a farmer's market or whatever, I use Square or iZettle or one of these. If I want to like sell things online, I probably use Stripe. If I want to transfer money, I use TransferWise. If I want to like take out a short-term loan, I use Funding Circle or
Vongo or whatever.
Or in the US there's like Prosper and Elon and stuff. And so you go from a world where like you have banks with these like stone columns on the high street providing like all these services and this whole like platform of services to like all these different companies on the internet for each different thing, and like gradually if you keep removing things, like there's not a whole lot left, and so I think that's a troubling trend for banks.
That was you have one more question, but that's kind of the last question. Is it get to a point where banks aren't necessary? You don't need to put the money here to move it to here. We can all be
So I'm trying to think what services will stay with banks for the next while. Certainly, like banks, because of the way the regulatory environment has evolved, a lot of these, if you talk to TransferWise, they're probably built on a bank, and so they like hold the money in the meantime, like in a bank. And so like banks are pretty good at storing money, and they're pretty good at like being regulated and like managing regulations. And so I think it will certainly see for a long time, all these services that I mentioned, like Stripe, Square, iZettle, Wonga, whatever, they all like back end to a bank. A bank sits behind them at some point, but is in no way exposed to the consumer. And so I think you'll see banks for a long time being like the platform upon which all these various services are built. I think the problem for banks is that then becomes a commodity. If I just need you as like a dumb store of money, then it's like a race to the bottom of like which bank can be the cheapest dumb store of money. And so banks traditionally have always like claimed that they're like, you know, relationship businesses, and they have, you know, the ad on TV with like the handshake and whatever. At least it's this way in America. And as they move away from being like relationship businesses and more towards being a utility, then it's just like I can get electricity from this company or this company, and I'm just going to look at the like number of cents per kilowatt.
The price, right. Last question?
Last question.
Then we'll wrap this up.
So we're talking about some ideas and interesting questions, and of course, for any founder, one of the most interesting areas in startup is the VCs. So we came with the question, we want to know, who in your opinion is the cool VC? Cannot be one of your own investors is the catch. So who do you think is a cool VC? Who's a VC that you would most want to have a beer with that's not one of your investors?
So, that I would most want to have a beer with?
Yeah. And why? I like this question. It's like, because all the VCs have different, everyone's always got a different opinion on the different VCs.
So yeah, I mean, our investors are, and this isn't answering the question, but our investors are Sequoia, Andreessen, Redpoint, General Catalyst. Those are the kind of institutional investors, as well as some like larger angels who, I mean, they're not really angels because they invest reasonably large amounts of money, like Peter Thiel. And all those are all the people we work with there are pretty good guys. The other kind of fairly well-regarded firms in the Valley are like, you know, Benchmark, Kozla, ones like this. People I'd want to have a beer with.
Not to talk investment. It's just like...
Not to talk investment. First Round Capital, I don't know if you've seen, they do these like crazy videos every year with like based on memes. And they're like slightly awkward, but they're like awkward in the like fun family Christmas photo way, in that they did Friday, Rebecca Black spoof.
I think I did see this.
They did like the Old Spice another year. And so they seem like
First Round Capital,
like pretty chill guys. Like if you can, like one of the guys was like in the bath towel, like being the Old Spice guy. I think that was Josh Kopelman, and so he was there like in his bath towel recording this. And like if you can do that for a video for, you know, millions of people to see, I think you're probably a good guy to have.
And what about the European VCs?
Yeah, so I don't know the European VC scene that well. I mean, I would turn that question back to you. Like, you tell me who we should be.
Oh no, I can't. I'm the host.
You're supposed to be impartial.
I thought I could pawn that one off.
That's a great question, though. I like that.
It's just always interesting. I'm always interested to see that, because it's a funny world in which perception is often everything, and half the battle is there somebody I'd want to have to be with? Somebody who's interesting.
And this is the classic one of, you know, the polls in the 2000 presidential election showing that like John Kerry was the person that people thought was more competent, and George Bush was the person they wanted to have a beer with.
That's a terrifying analogy for the startup scene.
Oh, it's interesting though, because I mean, I guess all money isn't the same. You know, if you're looking for a certain investment at a certain market cap, you have to think a little bit beyond.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and VCs have managed to, you know, you would think that it is, but VCs have really managed to, you know, you talk to anyone raising investment in the Bay Area, in the marketing concept of the Valley, and you know, they're talking about which engineers have which investors have this value, and you know, who has the best connections, and like what services each one's provide, and the VCs have really turned the conversation towards like, you know, working with a firm and partnering with them, and you know, what you value and which you're going to go with, rather than again a sheer like utility, a sheer like numbers for stock game, and I think that's like that's certainly very good for the investors, right? Because they get to compete on something other than price.
Excellent. How do people get a hold of you? Do you want them to get a hold of you?
I'm just john@stripe.com. They're more than welcome to get a hold of me.
At Twitter, you're at Collison and at Stripe.
At Collision on Twitter, which causes no end of confusion.
Oh, wow.
You're at Collision?
Yeah.
Did you do that on purpose?
No, I did it on purpose. So it was like, you know, a handful of people used, not very often, but a handful of people used to nickname me Collision when I was a teenager.
It's a cool name.
And
I almost saw it a few times.
I've bunged up that tweet that I sent before this started.
You wouldn't be the first. But yeah, at Collision on Twitter, john@stripe.com, John with an H at stripe.com on the emails. And yeah.
Awesome. You know, thanks so much for coming. You know, when I told a bunch of people today I was going to have John on, I was like, yeah, he was 17 and he sold his first company, and now he's 23 and doing this. And some people get that look in their eyes. They're like, oh, what am I doing with my life? And they're like, I already don't like him a little bit. But I had the complete opposite reaction. I read like John's bio and I'm like, God damn, I want to talk to this kid because I love kids, young men. I just love seeing young men doing things that I might not have been doing at that age. And so really excited to hear your story, man, really.
Thanks for having me on. This was a fun chat.
And Bryce made it happen. The man behind the scenes.
Oh, you shush, Brian.
Cool. Well, this is the first time you'll see Bryce. You're going to see him hopefully once every 2 weeks, or who knows when. Subbing in for Colin as we continue this crazy journey, which is Silicon Real.
Silicon Real.
Did I miss anything?
I think we're good. I think that's a wrap.
Cool. If you want to listen only, we're on iTunes. You can check us out on Twitter at Silicon Real, and we'll be doing this every week. Somebody from the technology startup community, either here in London or coming through London, like in John's case. So that's it. It's about the people.
There you go.
Sweet.
All right, guys.
Thanks very much.
Welcome to London.
Exciting.
And it's so great you're doing it. It's needed, and I want to help you get as many people in this seat and telling these stories, because life is a series of fascinating tales, and that's all it is,
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that this Silicon Real project that Colin had the idea, and that I'm going to help to do. It's really all.